I've never liked family gatherings. The small talk, the forced smiles, the unsaid expectations. But I'd been trying, really trying, to make an effort. After all, I'd just gotten promoted, and this was supposed to be a celebration. Yet, I felt out of place as soon as I walked through the door. Amanda was the first to greet me, her perfectly coiffed hair catching the light. She smiled that big, bright smile, the one that said, "I have it all figured out." Her husband, Chase, stood next to her, nodding politely but always looking like he had somewhere better to be. I scanned the room for my mother. She was perched on the arm of the couch, chatting with some distant relative about her latest business ventures. She looked at me briefly, gave me a half-hearted wave, then turned back to the conversation. It's like I wasn't even there. I hadn't expected much, but even so, the coldness stung. It always did. I was used to being the invisible one, the one who could be ignored without causing too much of a stir. But tonight, something felt different. It wasn't just the usual neglect. It was the look in their eyes. A quiet but undeniable smirk on Amanda's face. The subtle nod from my mother when she thought I wasn't looking. Then, Liam, my 10-year-old nephew, the spoiled brat of the family, ran up to me with that mischievous grin. "Hey, Uncle David," he said, his voice too sweet. "Bet you can't drink this without spilling it." Before I could even react, he shoved his glass of red wine into my hands. The liquid splashed out, drenching my shirt, my pants, the floor. And then, in a moment of pure defiance, Liam laughed loudly, as though it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. The room erupted in laughter. Amanda's laugh echoed above the rest, followed by my mother's. Chase joined in, his chuckle a little too loud, too forced. I froze. My hand still clutched the wine glass, the red liquid dripping from it, staining my fingers. I glanced around, looking for someone, anyone, to say something. But nobody did. I swallowed hard, fighting the wave of anger that rose in my chest. I was humiliated. But I did nothing. Not because I didn't want to fight back, but because I had learned a long time ago that fighting back only made them see you as weak. If I stayed silent, maybe they'd see me as strong, as the responsible one they could always rely on. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't laughing. I was waiting. "Eat it off the floor, Uncle David," Liam shouted as the laughter continued. His words hung in the air like a challenge, daring me to react. I did nothing. I simply walked away from the table, the laughter following me like a shadow. I made my way to the bathroom, my mind racing. I had been humiliated by my own family, and I knew, deep down, it wasn't just about the wine. It was about everything, years of neglect, of being treated like the invisible one, the pawn in their game. As I wiped the wine from my shirt, I saw it, my phone, glowing on the counter. A message from work. "David, this is a serious matter. We've found discrepancies in your accounts. You're being investigated for financial fraud." I stared at the screen. My body went cold. I had worked too hard for too long to let everything fall apart. But as I stood there, staring at that message, I realized something. The fraud wasn't the only thing being exposed. The truth was finally coming to light. And just like that, I understood, the wine wasn't the only thing that was about to spill. The question now was, how much longer would I let them get away with it? How much longer would I stay silent? The storm had already begun. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The wine spilling on me, the laughter of my family, all felt like a small piece of something bigger. As I drove home from the party, I kept replaying it in my mind. The way they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't watching. The way Amanda smiled just a little too brightly, and Liam, her son, had gone out of his way to humiliate me. It was as though everything had been planned. But I had other things to deal with now. I couldn't focus on my family's petty games, not when my career was on the line. I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone. The message from my office, the one about the fraud investigation, still glowed on the screen. Discrepancies in your accounts. You're being investigated for financial fraud. I didn't know where to start. I dialed my boss, Nolan, a man who had been both a mentor and an enigma to me. The phone rang once, twice, before he picked up. "David," he said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't place. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but there are things being uncovered. Your personal finances, they've been flagged. We need to talk." I was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. My mind raced. I've always been careful. There was no way I could have messed this up. "I'll come by your office tomorrow morning," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Don't. It's better if you stay put for now. We'll come to you. You're not safe walking into that office right now." That sent a chill down my spine. I ended the call without another word. My instincts screamed that this was not just a business matter, it was personal. The next day, I went through my accounts, combing over every transaction, every loan, every penny that had moved through my name. What I found was nothing short of a nightmare. There were loans I didn't remember signing, accounts I didn't know existed, and wire transfers that made no sense. The more I dug, the clearer it became. The name of the company receiving the money was a familiar one, an investment firm that my mother, Linda, was connected to. I felt my chest tighten. I had trusted them. I trusted my family. But this was no accident. This wasn't some administrative oversight. This was planned. And it was time to face the ugly truth. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a bottle of whiskey, pouring myself a drink. My hands shook. How long had they been doing this? How many years had I signed away my life, trusting them without ever questioning? It wasn't until I checked my phone again that the real horror set in. A message from Amanda. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. But you need to understand, we had no choice." I stared at the message for a long time. No choice? What the hell did she mean? The tone of the message was too calm, too detached for someone who supposedly cared about me. Before I could respond, another notification popped up. This one from Chase, Amanda's husband. "David, you don't know what you're getting into. Drop this now." My mind raced. What were they really afraid of? I stood up and grabbed my coat. This wasn't just about fraud. This was about something much darker, something they had been hiding from me for years. I made my way to Amanda's house. The neighborhood was quiet, the sun barely setting. I rang the doorbell and waited. When Amanda opened the door, her expression was one I knew too well, one that said she wasn't happy to see me, but also didn't want to make a scene. "David," she said, her voice cool but with an edge of something else, something I couldn't quite place. "What are you doing here?" "I know about the loans," I said, cutting straight to the point. "And I know about the investments. You've been using me. For years." Her face remained impassive, but I could see a flicker of something behind her eyes, fear. "Amanda," I pressed, "you need to tell me the truth. What is this really about? What is your mother doing with my name?" She stepped back, her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "It's not just about money, David. This whole thing is bigger than you think. Bigger than all of us." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" But she didn't answer. Instead, she glanced toward the hallway, where I saw Chase standing in the shadows, his arms crossed, his eyes locked on me. I didn't need to hear him speak to know he was involved in this. He'd always had that cold, calculating look about him. "I shouldn't be talking to you about this," Amanda muttered, stepping closer. "Just walk away, David. You don't know what you're getting into." But it was too late. I was already too deep, and I wasn't going to back out now. "I want to know the truth," I said firmly, my voice shaking with anger. "Tell me everything." She looked at me for a long moment, her face torn between fear and resignation. Then she sighed, and I saw the walls crumble. "It's not just about the money, David," she repeated. I have been forced to do this. It was supposed to be temporary. We were supposed to be able to pay it all back, but Mom. She's in too deep. The words hung in the air. In too deep with who? I demanded. Before she could answer, the sound of a car door slamming outside caught our attention. I turned instinctively, and for a split second, I saw Chase's face turn pale. Go, he said urgently, his tone hard. We'll talk later. Now isn't the time. Amanda's expression hardened once more. You should leave, David. Before it's too late. But it was already too late. The moment she said that, I knew I was trapped in something far darker than I could ever have imagined. The game had begun, and I was no longer just a player. I was the prize. I couldn't get the image of Amanda's face out of my head. The way she had looked at me when she said, "We've been forced to do this," kept replaying over and over again. Her fear had been real. But what did she mean? Forced by who? By what? The seconds stretched into minutes as I sat in my car, parked 2 blocks away from Chase and Amanda's house, trying to steady my breath. The world outside seemed to move in slow motion, but inside me, every part of me was racing. I couldn't afford to wait any longer. I was already in too deep. And now, every move I made felt like it would tip me over the edge. To understand the game, you first have to understand the rules. I had heard that somewhere before. Maybe from one of the books I read, maybe from a conversation in passing. But now, in the middle of everything, it rang true. This wasn't a game anymore. This was survival. I hit the gas and pulled away from the curb, heading straight for Nolan's office. I had to get some answers before the whole thing came crashing down on me. The fraud investigation wasn't the only thing at stake. My entire life, the life they'd built off my name, was about to come undone. I wasn't going down without a fight. The parking garage of Nolan's building smelled like stale coffee and fresh concrete, but it did little to mask the growing sense of dread in my chest. As I stepped into the elevator, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I'd been at this job for years. I knew how the system worked. But in that moment, the truth seemed so far away. How had I gotten here? How had I gone from the reliable, responsible son to the one drowning in lies? The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. I stepped out and headed straight for Nolan's office. His secretary, an older woman named Karen, didn't look up from her desk when I approached. "Nolan expecting you?" she asked, her tone clipped. "No," I said. "But I need to see him." She nodded, barely acknowledging me as she picked up the phone and dialed. Seconds felt like hours. I stood there, my heart pounding, knowing that Nolan was involved, just as I knew that everyone who had ever claimed to love me had played their part in this dark charade. A few moments later, Nolan stepped out into the hallway. He was tall, his face hard but not unfriendly. I had always trusted him. Now, though, there was something about his eyes that made me question everything. "David," he said, his voice neutral. "What's going on? I thought we agreed to keep things quiet." I didn't care about his agreements anymore. The world I knew had just shattered. "I know about the loans, Nolan. About the fraud. About Linda, about the money laundering." His expression didn't change. But there was a brief flicker in his eyes. He knew I was onto something. "David," he said, his voice lowering, "you need to leave this alone. You're in over your head." That's when I saw it. The look, the fear in his eyes. He was warning me. But it wasn't a warning of concern. It was a warning of danger. My danger. "I'm not leaving until I get answers," I said, stepping closer. "You tell me what's really going on. I'm not afraid anymore." For a second, Nolan didn't speak. His lips pressed together in a tight line. Then, he turned away and motioned for me to follow him into his office. The air between us felt charged, like an electric current, and the tension was palpable. I had no idea where this conversation was going, but I knew one thing: it wasn't going to end the way I thought. Inside his office, Nolan shut the door behind us, and then he sank into his chair. The look on his face was almost sad. David, this is bigger than you think, he said quietly, almost too quietly. You're not the only one they've been targeting. My pulse quickened. Who? What do you mean? He looked at me for a long time, as if trying to figure out whether to tell me the truth. Finally, he sighed. Your mother Linda, she's been orchestrating things behind your back for years. It started with small things, investments, loans in your name, but it grew much bigger. She's been laundering money through a network of offshore accounts. My blood ran cold. Linda. My own mother. You knew? I couldn't believe it. I had trusted her with everything, my name, my future. No, Nolan replied quickly. I didn't know at first. But when I found out, I tried to warn her. She didn't listen. And now, David, you've stumbled into something dangerous. It's too late to stop this. They're going to make sure you stay quiet. I felt like the floor was ripped out from under me. They? Who was he talking about? And why was he warning me? Was he part of this, too? Nolan leaned forward, his voice dropping. Your mother's involvement goes deep. We're talking international. I don't know how far she's gone, but I know enough to tell you this, she's not the one in charge. Someone higher is pulling the strings. I blinked. This was bigger than I had imagined. This wasn't just about my family's debts. This was a global network of corruption, and my mother was at the center of it. But I'm not just going to stand by, I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. I need to know what's happening. Who's behind this? Before Nolan could answer, the door swung open, and a familiar figure stepped in, Chase. You should have listened to Nolan, he said, his voice cold, deliberate. Now it's too late. My mind raced as I realized Chase wasn't just Amanda's husband. He was part of it all. He had been watching me. Waiting. Leave now, Chase ordered, stepping closer. You don't know who you're up against. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not without answers. The room seemed to close in on me. I could feel the walls pressing, the pressure building. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The truth was coming for me, and I had to face it. You're all in on this, aren't you? I said, my voice rising. Chase's smirk was the only answer I needed. I didn't know how I would escape this. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to back down. I drove through the dark streets of Seattle, the city lights casting fleeting shadows against the night. My mind raced. Amanda's words still echoed in my ears, we're in too deep, David. You don't know what you're getting into. The truth was unraveling fast, and with every new discovery, the weight of it all grew heavier. The sound of the tires on the wet asphalt was the only thing I could hear as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady my nerves. My family was involved in something far worse than I'd imagined. Money laundering. Offshore accounts. And now, Nolan, the man I had trusted, was warning me to back off. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Sometimes, you have to burn everything down to see what's left. I had heard that somewhere once, maybe a movie, or maybe my own subconscious trying to give me a push. The irony wasn't lost on me. Everything I had built, the trust, the work, the careful balance of my life, was crumbling, and it wasn't just about the fraud anymore. It was about what they were willing to sacrifice to keep their empire intact. I parked in front of Nolan's building. The lights were dim, flickering slightly, like they were struggling to stay alive. Inside, I knew I'd find more than just answers. I'd find the truth about how deep the corruption really ran. I stepped out of the car and walked into the lobby, my heart pounding with every step. The receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes, barely looked up when I approached. I need to see Nolan, I said, my voice firm but controlled. She nodded, picked up the phone, and within moments, Nolan's secretary was leading me into his office. It smelled like stale coffee and old paper, the kind of room where secrets are meant to stay buried. Nolan stood by the window, looking out over the city, his back to me. He didn't turn around when I entered. "David," he said without looking up. "I told you this wasn't your fight. You don't understand what you're up against." I closed the door behind me. "I understand more than you think," I said, my voice steady but laced with a quiet fury. "I understand that my family has been using me for years. And I understand that you've been in on it." Nolan finally turned to face me. His eyes were cold, his expression unreadable. "David," he began again, his voice quieter now. "You don't know who you're dealing with. The people behind this, they don't play by the rules. They don't care about you, or me, or anyone. This is bigger than us. Bigger than just your family. If you push too hard, you'll destroy everything. They'll come for you. They'll make sure you never get in their way again." I could feel the chill in the air. Fear. It hung around him like a shroud. "Who?" I asked, my eyes narrowing. "Who are these people, Nolan?" He looked down at his desk, running his hand through his hair. "I can't tell you," he said, almost pleading. "I won't tell you. It's not just the family. It's them. I'm trying to protect you, David." "You're trying to protect yourself," I shot back. "You're just as guilty as they are. You've been in this from the beginning." There was a long pause. Nolan seemed to shrink under my gaze, his composure cracking for the first time. "I tried to warn Linda," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "She didn't listen. She thought she could handle it. But now it's out of control. They'll take her down first. And then they'll come for everyone." "Who will?" I demanded. "Who is she dealing with, Nolan?" But before he could answer, the office door flew open. "Chase." I froze. He was standing in the doorway, his expression hard, eyes full of malice. "Did you really think you could just waltz in here and get answers?" he sneered, stepping inside. "You don't know what's at stake, David. But you're going to find out." Nolan's face went white. "Chase, stop this. He doesn't know what's happening. You don't need to." "I think it's too late for that," Chase interrupted, his voice sharp. "You've both made your choices. Now you're going to live with the consequences." I didn't understand at first. I wasn't sure whether it was the adrenaline or the sheer shock of it all, but something inside me snapped. "You are the one behind it all, aren't you?" I spat, pointing at Chase. "You and Linda. You've been running this scam, haven't you?" Chase smirked. He walked closer, towering over me. "It's not just a scam, David. It's the future. You think your little law firm matters? Think again. The game's bigger than that. Bigger than you." And then it hit me, the game wasn't about money. It was about control. Power. And I had been the pawn, the one they used to keep the pieces in place. And now, I wasn't useful anymore. Chase pulled something from his jacket, a small envelope, sealed. "Your mother's ready to finalize the deal," he said coldly, dropping it onto Nolan's desk. "Once you sign this, you're in. There's no turning back." I stared at the envelope. My name was on it. The thought of signing it felt like betrayal. But the moment I reached for it, something changed. The room seemed to close in around me. I felt the walls pressing against me, like someone was watching. Waiting. The envelope was a trap. I couldn't just walk away from this. I wasn't going to let them win. Before I could react, the sound of sirens pierced the air outside. I froze. This wasn't a coincidence. Something was happening, something I didn't understand, but it was happening now. "Don't make a scene, David," Chase warned, stepping closer, his voice low and dangerous. "You've already crossed the line. Now, you'll pay for it." But I wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. I felt the air grow thick as I stepped into the elevator, the hum of the machine blending with the chaos inside my mind. The moment Nolan had looked at me with those eyes, full of regret and fear, I knew the game was over. I'd been a pawn, but now the pieces were moving fast, and I was no longer willing to play by their rules. The elevator doors slid open. Chase was waiting for me outside, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. I had no idea how long he'd been standing there, but the chill in his stare told me he wasn't interested in conversation. "David," he said, his voice steady, too steady. "You should have listened. You're in too deep." "I didn't ask to be a part of this," I shot back, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside, my pulse raced. Every word he spoke, every movement he made, felt like a threat. I could feel the walls closing in, the weight of the situation settling like a vice around my chest. "Doesn't matter now," Chase said, his eyes narrowing. "You know too much." My mind flashed back to Nolan's office, to the warning he'd given me, "If you push too hard, they'll come for you." I wasn't sure who they were, but I knew it was time to find out. The car ride was a blur. I barely remembered the route, just the constant feeling of being watched. Every turn, every stoplight, felt like it was part of the trap being set around me. Chase didn't speak as he drove, his hands gripping the wheel like he was steering us into a storm. When we arrived, it wasn't a place I recognized. The building loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the dusky sky. A parking garage, empty save for a few scattered vehicles. The sound of my footsteps echoed as I stepped out of the car, my heart thudding in my chest. "Follow me," Chase ordered. His voice was low, menacing. I didn't move. I wasn't going to just follow him blindly into whatever hell he had prepared. "Where are we?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. "Just a place to talk," Chase replied, but I could see the lie in his eyes. This wasn't just a conversation. This was the final act. I had no choice. I followed him into the building. Inside, the air was cold, the kind of cold that made your skin prickle. The lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. We walked down a narrow hallway, the silence broken only by the sound of our footsteps. Chase led me to a door at the end of the hall. He pushed it open, and we stepped into a small, dimly lit room. At first, I didn't recognize the woman sitting at the table. Her back was to me, but the moment she turned around, I knew. Linda. My mother. Her face was pale, her eyes narrowed with something that could only be described as disdain. I hadn't seen her in days, but there she was, as if everything were normal. As if I hadn't just discovered she was involved in a massive criminal operation. "What the hell is this?" I asked, my voice raw with a mixture of confusion and fury. Linda didn't answer right away. She simply looked at me, as if deciding whether to acknowledge my presence or not. Finally, she sighed, her voice smooth but cold. "You should have stayed out of it, David," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. "You were never meant to know. You were just the responsible one, the one who never questioned. We needed you." I shook my head, my stomach turning. "Needed me for what? What have you done?" Chase stepped forward, his hands in his pockets. "It's not just about money, David," he said. "It's about control. You've been part of the plan the entire time. All those loans, all that paperwork. It was part of the setup. But now, you're the last piece. Once you sign the papers, it's over. You're in the game. No more running away." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The trap was closing, and I had no idea how to escape. Linda stood up, walking slowly toward me. Her eyes never left mine. "You think you're better than us? That you can just walk away from everything? You think I didn't do this for you? All of it was for your future, David. For your security." "Security?" I spat, my voice rising. "You've been stealing from me. You've been stealing from everyone. For years. And now you want me to be part of it?" She smiled, almost pitying me. "You were never meant to know, but now that you do, you're in too deep. You'll sign the papers, David. Or else I'll make sure you regret it. The threat hung in the air. I wasn't sure what she meant, but I knew I didn't want to find out. Sign it, and everything goes away, she continued, sliding a folder across the table toward me. We can go back to normal. Your debts, your name, they'll all be washed clean. But if you try to go to the authorities, or worse, expose us, well, I've already told you the consequences. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the folder, my hands shaking as I flipped it open. The papers inside were official bank documents, loan agreements, and a letter of consent that had my name on it. My signature. You've already signed. Chase's voice was cold, final. Now, just add your signature here, and you're part of it. The family business. I couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to tear the papers up, but there was nowhere to go. I was cornered. This wasn't just about fraud. This wasn't just about money. It was about my life, my entire existence, and they were going to make me choose. There are no choices left, David. Only consequences. The words echoed in my mind, a cruel reminder of how far I'd fallen. I felt trapped. Like a rat in a cage. The air seemed to close in on me. I glanced at the door, but I knew I wouldn't make it. In the end, the decision wasn't mine to make. They had already won. The sirens were getting closer, the wail of the approaching police car mixing with the sound of my own heartbeat. My body was frozen in place, my mind screaming at me to move. But I couldn't. I was cornered. It was too late. Chase's face was hard as stone, his eyes watching me like a predator sizing up its prey. My mother stood by the door, her arms crossed, her gaze distant. I could see it now, the contempt in her eyes, the same look she'd given me every time she expected me to just go along with her plans. You've pushed too far, David, Chase said, his voice cold and final. It's over. I didn't answer. My mind raced, but every part of me was paralyzed by the feeling of being trapped. I wasn't just fighting for my career anymore. I was fighting for my life. The sound of the sirens was deafening now. I could hear the officers shouting outside, their footsteps pounding against the pavement. I turned toward the window, a fleeting thought crossing my mind, should I run? But I knew it wouldn't matter. I was out of time. I never wanted this for you, my mother spoke finally, her voice a mixture of sorrow and resolve. But we don't get to choose the paths we walk, David. Not in this world. I felt a sickening weight in my chest. Was that what she believed? That this was all some grand, unavoidable fate? You chose this, Mom, I said, my voice tight, almost a growl. You chose to drag me into your lies. And for what? Money? Power? Control? Her eyes flickered for just a moment, and I knew that for all her calculated detachment, she could feel it too. The walls closing in on her. We didn't have a choice, she said softly, almost to herself. This was the only way. The only way to survive. I stepped toward her, every movement deliberate, every word coming out like a punch. You were never about survival, Mom. You were about domination. And I. A sudden, sharp bang interrupted me. The door burst open, and Nolan stormed in, his face pale, his eyes frantic. They're here. His voice was almost frantic as he grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the back door. I barely had time to process what was happening. Police? Was he working with them? Or was this just another game? Come on, we don't have time, Nolan snapped. They're not here for us yet, but they will be soon. I shook free from his grasp, my mind still racing. What is this? Who's behind this? He didn't answer. He simply shoved me toward the exit. Outside, the cold air hit me like a slap in the face. My legs felt heavy as I ran, adrenaline kicking in. But as I turned the corner, my heart stopped. There, standing in the street, was Amanda. Her arms were outstretched, and her eyes were wide with fear. Amanda? I gasped. What are you doing here? I had to stop it, David. I had no choice. I couldn't let you go through with it. I couldn't let you ruin everything, she said, her voice trembling. I tried to warn you. The words didn't register immediately. My mind was still spinning. The sirens were deafening now, and I could feel the weight of the situation pressing on me, suffocating me. What are you talking about? I demanded. Before she could answer, a car screeched to a halt behind me. I turned, half expecting to see more police, but instead, it was Chase, holding something in his hand. A flash drive. You should have never gotten involved, David, he said coldly. But now, you get to understand what you've really been a part of. I didn't understand. None of this made sense. What had Amanda been trying to protect me from? And why had Chase been hiding something? Everything clicked. The files. The documents. The loans. The entire operation wasn't just about money. It was about something far more sinister. The flash drive. Amanda's betrayal. My mother's silence. I didn't have time to process it all. Nolan's hand shot out, grabbing the drive from Chase's hand. You don't get it, David, Nolan said, his voice shaking. It's not about us. It's about them. You were never meant to know. I looked at him, the truth dawning on me. Nolan wasn't part of the conspiracy. He was its target. Them was a corporate syndicate tied to my mother's business. My family had been used as pawns in a much larger game, manipulated by people who wanted control of more than just money. They wanted influence. Power over the entire industry. Over everything I thought I knew. The sirens grew louder as a police officer appeared, stepping into the street with his hand raised. Behind him, a black SUV idled, its tinted windows hiding who was inside. David's life was no longer his. It was theirs. And the only way out was to expose them all. Final words echoed in my mind as I watched the SUV pull away, my family's dark empire crumbling into dust. Sometimes, the only way out is through. The truth had set me free. But it came at a cost.